Should Spider-Man 3 feature a multiplayer component? Some of you hear that question and think absolutely not. What are you thinking? That's a terrible idea. Others of you are probably thinking yes, in fact, Spider-Man 2 should have had some kind of multiplayer component. And while I don't want to aggravate the leaks that were already very harmful to Insomniac, we do know that at one point there was the entertainment of an idea of some kind of multiplayer project within their Spider-Man universe. A decision to add multiplayer would have pros and cons. The biggest pro that I can think of is that it would be a change of pace. Ever since Spider-Man 2 from 2004, so over 20 years now, Spider-Man games have had a very familiar formula. You play as Spider-Man in an open world with a main story and side missions. As we have seen, there's a lot you can do with this formula. There's been many Spider-Man games at this point, and many of them have been very good. And with Insomniac's franchise, we've seen the continuation of that formula with continued success. With that being said, one can't help but wonder if this formula would receive a fresh feel by including multiplayer functionality. Imagine exploring New York City with your friends, where you're playing as Peter Parker, your friend is playing as Miles Morales, and someone you just met on the server is playing as Venom, and you're all exploring the city together. Multiple players could also change the dynamic of combat and add a whole new layer to that piece of the experience. I imagine air launching an enemy up and then having one of my friends web zip to him and start doing aerial combat while I zip to another enemy on the ground and continue fighting. I imagine going through stealth scenarios where one of my friends lures some of the enemies away so that one of the lone gunmen can be taken down by me. I also imagine objectives that are multi-layered, where there's multiple things that have to be done by multiple different people in a certain amount of time. It would increase the challenge and force players to work together really well. One final component I could see being added here is a PvP mode, where you could play as Spider-Man or Venom and you go up against someone playing as Lizard or Kraven. Now, I'm not saying that it would be easy for Insomniac to create a plethora of playable characters based on characters that have shown up in the games, but the PvP mode of Friend or Foe is pretty much the only thing I liked about that game, and to see a AAA version of that created by Insomniac is too good of a fantasy to not talk about. There are so many characters that have interesting gameplay potential that I could see Insomniac tackling in some kind of PvP mode. However, with all of that being said, with all of the possible great inclusions of multiplayer that would add to the experience, there are some cons we need to talk about. First, the story could suffer. I do think this is one of the biggest draws of the game, Gotham Knights, where they tried to add multiple playable characters to Gotham City with multiplayer functionality, and the game actually suffered in pretty much every other respect. The story was watered down as to cater to any of the 4 playable characters you might be playing as at any given time, or any pairing if you were playing multiplayer. The combat felt watered down because the free flow combat system didn't feel like a system designed for multiplayer. The stealth felt less refined and dynamic because it had to account for potentially 2 players engaging in stealth at the same time, and both the traversal and frame rate had to be slowed down to accommodate multiple players exploring a vast Gotham City map. Could Insomniac afford to make similar sacrifices in order to get multiple playable characters in New York City at the same time? The truth is, I don't think they could. Thus far, Insomniac has delivered us Spider-Man games that are built around strengths that really only single-player story-driven games have. They tell compelling and rich stories with many cutscenes. They offer gameplay with high frame rates and strong graphical fidelity. They've ensured the highest quality traversal because they're not trying to account for multiple playable characters in the map at the same time, and as a result, we've been able to get the best technological experience for single players in each of their past games. Having to slow down the traversal of Spider-Man 3 might be okay for a player who thinks it's worth the trade-off in order to have their friend join their session, but for someone who continues to play this series solo, it might feel disappointing and like a step back. If the story has to face a bit of a hit in order to accommodate multiple playable characters that might be experiencing a cutscene at any given time, that could hurt the game as well. As a result, I think that multiplayer of Spider-Man 3 would need to be very intentionally designed as a separate mode from the main story. In other words, I don't think it would be worth the time and investment for Insomniac to try and figure out how to make the main game of Spider-Man 3 playable by multiple people at the same time. Instead, if they are considering doing some kind of multiplayer component, it should be a side application that comes with Spider-Man 3, but is a completely separate application that you open for the sole multiplayer experience. If they did want to integrate it into the main game somehow, I would say have it be a side mission. Maybe there's multiverse rifts that you can go and load into a server where there's a multiplayer mission for you to complete with friends. As far as what this multiplayer side of the game should be, I don't think it should try to follow the trend that so many games like Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, and Marvel's Avengers have followed in trying to compete with games like Fortnite. Instead, I think it should simply be a fun mode for fans of the single-player games. It could entail some kind of free roaming mechanic where you can roam around the city with your friends and just stop street crimes, but honestly, I think even if they were just scripted missions to play through, that could be enough. I'd love to race a friend from Harlem to the financial district and see who gets there first, with me playing as Venom and them playing as Spider-Man. I'd have fun completing multi-point objectives. Maybe there's 10 bombs across the city that me and my friends have to defuse within a certain time frame, or maybe there's 4 runaway cars that we have to stop before they get away. Multiplayer boss fights could be really interesting, and as I mentioned before, a PvP mode in a AAA Spider-Man game would be nothing short of S tier. And while personally a multiplayer component to Spider-Man 3 that doesn't interfere with the base game or the base game story or anything like that sounds really fun and seems like it would be a great addition to the experience, I worry that Insomniac would have to sacrifice some of the polish and attention to detail that was going into the base game. There would be a lot of resources and time and personnel required to making a multiplayer component for Spider-Man 3 work, and that's all time and attention that personally I'd rather see the base game get. It would be a shame for them to have to cut content from the main story or to reduce some of the gameplay features they had planned on adding because they're focused on getting a multiplayer server up and running for this game so that players can engage with that as well. In order to really pull this off, you'd almost need to do what they did with Batman Arkham Origins, where you have a third-party studio come in and develop the multiplayer part of the game, while the main studio at Insomniac develops the main part of the game. So overall, while I do think that multiplayer is an interesting idea in a Spider-Man game that should be explored at some point, I don't know that Spider-Man 3, potentially the conclusion of Insomniac's trilogy, should be the game that it's introduced into. Instead, I would much rather see the next studio that works on the Spider-Man IP figure out how to integrate multiplayer at the ground level with their first installment. It should be a consideration from day one, not something that they consider adding in after a few games have already released. And if at some point we do get a Spider-Man game with some kind of multiplayer component, my only hope is that it's still focused on giving us a true Spider-Man experience. I don't want Fortnite with Spider-Man skins. We already have that with Fortnite. I want a Spider-Man game that feels faithful to the lore and the gameplay mechanics that you'd want to experience, while also delivering a new part of that experience in the form of multiplayer. A system like that in a game like this shouldn't be designed to compete with these games with battle passes and MMO functionality. They should be designed to service fans of this IP. A multiplayer Spider-Man game should allow us to feel like Spider-Man working with allies. If I'm already paying $70 for the game, I shouldn't also be paying $15 per cosmetic. Heck, I'd even like them to go as far as to make it a couch co-op experience where I can play with my wife or brother and can have a fun experience playing locally with them. In any case, I do think the prospect of a multiplayer Spider-Man game, or just a component that's added to a single-player Spider-Man game that allows you to play with friends, is a really interesting prospect, and I would like to see it explored at some point, but personally, I don't think Insomniac's third and potentially final entry in their main Spider-Man series is the place to do it, as it could take away from the development of the main game. But let me know in the comments below what you think. Would you like to see multiplayer in Insomniac's Spider-Man 3? Thank you all so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and we'll see you guys in the next one.